Hyper and ExpressJS with a little bit of EJS from scratch. Hello, I'm Tom Wilson, and in this workshop, we are going to start from scratch and work through building an ExpressJS app using Hyper as our backend and EJS as our view. This will be an old school MVC architecture app. And hopefully, you will get to see just how you can start to use Hyper in any kind of application. Hyper is a service that provides core application primitives for backend services like data, storage, search, cache, and queues. Just as easy as clicking a button, as you'll see in this workshop. So, for this workshop, we're going to build a simple wiki like application or CRUD application called Mario Wkik. And the purpose of this application is to allow users to document the Mario universe, games, and characters. And throughout the course of this workshop, as we build this, you'll see kind of a natural way on how you can leverage Hyper in your applications. Um, so to get started, we're going to start in GitHub and we're going to create a new repository. We'll call this Mario Wkik. A quick, because wiki means quick, way to learn about Mario. And we'll make this public. And what I'll do is as I go through each step, I'll commit a branch along the way. That way it will be easy to backtrack in case you get lost while following along. So we created our repository. Now I'm going to create a new tab and then I'm going to copy this URL and then I'm going to type in the new tab https getpod.io and then I'm going to use the pound sign and then I'm going to paste that GitHub repository that I created in the URL. Then press enter. And what this is going to do is spin me up a blank virtual machine of my repository using a tool called Gitpod. This blank virtual machine will have Visual Studio Code installed, Node and NPM installed. Let's refresh that. Okay, great. Uh, okay. Um, okay, so what I'm going to do next, I'm just going to start here because I'll probably have to do this again anyway. Um, so the first thing we want to do is we want to initialize a Node.js project, and I'm going to use Yarn. Yarn is similar to NPM, but it has a little bit different way of resolving dependencies. It works quite nice. So I'm going to do yarn init and -y so I don't get prompted any information. And then I'm going to add kind of the bits that we'll need in this project um, to build our MVC Mario Wkik. So we're going to go yarn add express Zod. and Zod will allow us to define schemas. Node fetch, because we're going to need node fetch to connect to hyperconnect. And EJS, that's our view engine. We'll use that to create views, and hyperconnect, which will be our backend service suite. And we're going to also add a couple of development dependencies that will help us just keep things nice and tidy. And every time we make a change, it will restart our workspace. So .env will allow us to create a text file with our environment secrets, and then nodemon or nodedaemon, either way you want to call it, will basically spin up a node instance, and then every time we change a file, it will restart. So we're going to add those as dev dependencies. Pretty cool. And now we're going to go ahead and set up 3 folders because this is an MVC. We're going to make directory, and we're going to create a models directory, a views directory, and a controllers directory, just like that. So models is where our facts or data will go, and that's where we'll connect to our backend services. Controllers is really kind of the bridge between the model and the view, and the controller will accept actions from the external request or from the web server, and it will connect to models when it needs data, and then leverage that data to render views. And views in this case will be basically HTML files, but we'll make the extension of EJS, and that will allow us to add some dynamic variables when those HTML files are being generated. So we've got our models, views, and controllers, and let's go ahead and work with package JSON to get some stuff set up. We're going to use ESM modules, so we need to make the type of project a module type project. And that just means we'll need to use import everywhere. And then we're going to create a scripts section. And we're going to just have a dev script, which we'll call nodemon. And we're going to require .env/config server.js. And we'll do that for starters now. And then finally, what we're going to do is create a server.js file. And we'll import Express from Express. And we'll create an app. And we'll say app listen on port 3000. And we'll just console log server listening on port 3000. Okay. Now, what we want to do is set up our views. So we're going to do app.set view engine, and we're going to give it EJS. And that's going to let Express know, number one, to look in the views folder for view templates, and number two, import the EJS module, sorry. So we'll do a get on root, and what we'll just do is go to our controller. So we're going to call the home controller, and we'll import that in. Let's create controllers and do import home from controllers slash home.js. And we'll create that home.js. In our controller, we'll just do export default function, and it's going to take a request object and a response object, and then we're just going to return response.render, and we're going to say we'll render the index template, and we'll give it a title of Mario Wkik home. Okay, so this is this is old school. We'll create a view, and will call it index.ejs. So index.ejs, like that. And then we'll basically add a HTML file, and we're gonna use the include syntax to inject some stuff that we will, kind of inject in all of our views, like for example, the head section. And then that way it's just available in one spot, and we don't have to have a lot of duplicate stuff. And we have body, and then we have a header. And with that, we're gonna inject a nav view. So like other view engines or React's JSX or Svelte or whatever, you have these delimiters, and in this case with EGS, the delimiter is less than percent, and then percent greater than surrounds it. And the reason that we have those delimiters is to let the template engine know where to execute code. Oops. Okay. So here's our welcome screen, and we're just going to go ahead and create a head.ejs and a nav.ejs. So head.ejs and new file nav.ejs. Right? And with head, it's going to be our HTML head section with this title. That's why in our controller we passed a title in so that this head section gets that title. Oops, did I paste it in the wrong file? Okay. And then our navigation is just our navigation list. So with that, we have a nav element and some paths: home, games, characters, and about. Pretty cool. So we've got index, we've got head, which, what? I am losing my mind. Okay, let's try that again. So head, save, and navigation, save. Cool. Close, close, close. So if we got nav, we've got our links, we've got index, we've got head. So we have all of our templates here. And on our server, we're calling home, which is in our controllers. In this controller, we don't need data, so we're not getting any data. And we're just calling res.render, response.render, the index.js template, and we're passing a title. So at this point, all is good. We should be able to say yarn dev And that's good. So we're starting and we're looking for JS, MJS, and Json, watching the entire directory. And it says we're running a server on port 3000. Let's open that in the browser. And yay. So we have our nav bar. We have welcome. We just need to add a title, which I forgot. So we want in our header, say H1 Mario Wiki. And if we have time, we'll add some graphics or something like that. But for now, this will do just great. And let's go ahead and set up a .get ignore file. And that get ignore file will add node modules and .env because we're going to want to set up a .env. Okay. So now we have, the very basics of our app set up. We have our server running. Add a new console down here and probably should zoom out a little bit so you can see what's going on. Um, cool. So, models. Before we start to create, one of the first things we want to do is click games and list games. Of course, games does not exist. So let's kind of work that backwards. Okay. Um, what do we need? We need a view. So we're going to go in here and create a new folder called games. And in that new folder, we're going to create a new view called index.ejs. And in that, we're going to go ahead and create new view file. And we will import the head. So since we're in a subfolder, we need to do // to move up a folder in our views and then reference head. And that'll be our head section. We'll do body. And in the body, we'll have a header. And in that header, we will reference nav and we'll add H1 Mario Wiki. And then we'll have a main and in body. Okay. Not closing that. Okay, that's good. Okay, and we'll just put an H2 here. Um, games to do. Okay, so that's our view. Now we need a controller, right? So we'll go new folder, games, and we'll add a new file. We'll call this index.js because it's going to be a list of games. We could create one file and have them all in there, but I'm just going to create separate files just so that they're small and it's kind of easy to see what they're doing. So here we'll do export default function, request response, and then what we're going to want to do is just return res.render, and we'll say games index, and we need to give it a title, Mario Wiki games. Okay, so we've got our controller, And now we just need to go in the server and import the controller. So we'll import games from controllers games index.js slash index.js like that. And then we'll say app.get slash games and we'll say games. Pretty simple. All right. Pretty awesome. Let's go. Let's go back to our home, refresh, go to games. We've got games. So we've got home and games. But this games is just a view and a controller. We need to get data and we need a data source to do that. So um, this data source needs some sort of schema to define what a game is, and it also needs a backend service to store that. Let's go ahead and create a backend service. So we'll go to hyper.io and go to our dashboard. Okay. And then we're going to add an application. We're going to say Rakus Mario Wkik like that. And we're going to use data, maybe not cache for right now. We'll just use data for right now. So let's create a hyper app. Cool. We got it right here. And now we're going to copy our connection string. So we're going to hit the document here and hit copy. And we're going to go into our app and we're going to create a new file, .env. We're going to say hyper equals the connection string. Now the .env file will be loaded when the app runs because in our package JSON we're saying require .env config. And then we'll have access to this hyper value, which is our connection string, in the um, process.env object in Node, which is very cool. And that'll help us in our models. So we can go into our models directory and create a new model for a game. Okay. And the first thing we're going to do in that model is import our schema manager from Zod. And I just do the star as Z, but you could import like object, string, etc. Whatever. But what we want to do is set up our schema or our model. And this is how we'll validate data coming in from an untrusted area like the internet. So we can say it wants to be a shape of an object, and one of the properties is an ID. So we'll do dot string is the type, and we want to put a regex on it. We want to say that this ID must start with game, and in order to be valid, right? And then we want to type a document type, and it's a literal. It means that it can only be this value, but it needs to be set, or I can set it as a default game like that. And then we want a name, and let's go ahead and just put a max of 100 just so that you can't make a really long name. And we want a description, and let's do a max of 5,000 and make it optional, right? Description can be optional. And then we want like the date that the game was published. And we're looking for the year. So we'll make it a string and we'll set the minimum of 4 and the max of 4. So we don't get like, any kind of two digits like 80 for 1980, which won't make any sense. And then we'll create a function called validate, and it's going to take our data and it's going to just return the result of schema.safe parse data. Okay, so that is our game model, and now we need some functions on it. One function is a list so that we can list stuff. So we'll say export async function list, and we'll return. And this is where right now we're going to return promise dot resolve and just an empty array. Okay. So this is where we need to call hyper. Call hyper to get a list. But before we do that, we need to have some data in hyper. And we'll do that by creating a seed script. A seed script is where we can kind of bulk import a bunch of data, either for development or preloading. And it's just a helper script or a migration, you could call it. But we'll create a new folder called scripts. And we'll just in there create a new file called seed.js. In the seed.js, we're going to import connect from hyperconnect. And then we're going to instantiate hyper by calling connect and passing in the connection string, which is in the process.environment under the hyper value. And then we're going to just do an open and close parents because the instance that we want to connect to is the default instance. And we're going to use top level await. Make sure that you're running Node version 16 and above, so you can use top level await. I'm going to say await.hyper.data.bulk. And this command takes an array of documents, and I just so happen to have a list of games that we can kind of bulk add in. So got a list of games here. Save a bunch of typing. And then we're going to go ahead and console log another awaited call of list. Make sure that got in there. Now, if I go ahead and try to run that, node scripts seed, I'm going to get an error. And the reason that I'm going to get an error is because node fetch is not set up. And hyperconnect is expecting a fetch function and a request object of fetch to be available in the global workspace. So in order to do that, I'm going to create another script called register.js. And this script is going to register node fetch, and then we're going to require it. And actually, I need to rename it to CJS because of the whole node the whole node ESM required JS mess, and it is just a mess. I have to do that. So we're gonna basically bring in this function, this async function that's going to import dynamically node fetch, and then it's going to make that global, and we can call the register function like that. And this will allow us to connect to hyper, but just like we did the .env, we need to go to our package JSON and add another R and call scripts.register CJS like that. And then when we call our seed, which is node, we'll say dash R scripts.register CJS and dash R dot env slash config, and then we'll call scripts slash seed.js like that. So we're going to work hard to make that better, but for now, that's what you got to do is call this register CJS script here to get access to Hyperconnect. And now if we run yarn seed, okay, let's see, we got another error. Let's see. Did not find register scripts module register CJS. Maybe I misspelled it. Let's try run it from the command line, maybe. You know what? I probably need to do a dot in front of it. That's probably what it is. That. That way it doesn't think it's a NPM module. Let's try that. Cool. So that allowed us to add some docs, seed our data source, and now we've got a way to restart our app. So let's restart it. Let's see. Okay. So here's another kind of pain point is that it changes the extension to CJS JSON, and we want the the restart extension to be JS in JSON. So we have to change that in our package JSON. We can say extension equals star.js, that, comma, star.json. I think we can do that. Let's see. Yep. So now the extensions are JS and JSON. That's what we want. Cool. So now we've got fetch set up, which one day Node's going to make fetch global like the browser, like Dino, like Cloudflare workers, etc. If it's defaulted in the browser, it would be a good idea possibly to default it in Node. Um, so that's what we're hoping for anyway. Um, okay, so now we've got that set up. Let's go back to our models in our game model and let's implement our list function. So to do that, we're going to import connect from hyperconnect. Okay. And then we'll instantiate hyper. Sorry. Connect hyper. And then this is just the instance, so it could be default or you could have different kind of instances per service. If you leave it blank, it just defaults it. And then now we can say, let's use a query function to query all the documents that are type game. So we'll say result equals await hyper dot query, and we'll pass a selector of type game. So that's gonna call the data service and do a query and return all the documents of type game. And we'll say if result.ok, which means that it got the documents. Then we're going to return result.docs. Okay. We'll return the documents. And then else we'll just return empty documents. Okay. So that's our list function in our model. And now we can go back to our controller and we can import our game model, the list function from models game.js. And then we'll say games equals await list, that, and we'll pass games in our data object of our render function. Okay. And we need to make sure we use a sync. Okay. All right. So now we've got our list, we've got our games. Now we just have to go to our view. And we've got our to do here. Okay. Don't need that anymore. And we're going to create a section. In that section, we're going to do a games.map game, and we will wrap this code in these template blocks. So we create a template block, and then for each game, we'll create an aside and a header 3. Let's do a header 3. And then let's add game.name and do a paragraph and add game.description. And then we'll do another paragraph and we'll say published and game.published. Okay. So that's our view. So it's going to iterate through each one of these game objects. And for each one of those game objects, we're going to print out an aside, which will be a card in our HTML template. So let's give it a shot. Let's see how we're doing. We'll go to home. Home loads. That's great. Then we'll go to games. And boom. We've got some Mario games. Pretty cool. Okay. So the next thing we want to do, see where I'm at on time. I think we're good on time, kind of 40 minutes. So the next thing we want to do is add a game. And let's go ahead and do that. And we'll kind of do it outside in. So the first thing we'll do is So one of the things with this old school MVC approach is we're going to create a form, and then we're going to render that form with cross uh, cross site reference protection, um, so that you know when we do a post that it's only coming from our form that we rendered. And this will be a protection mechanism that you need to do when you generate forms via URL encoded form post. But and then in next future workshops, as we move to React and other things, you'll see other ways to do that as well. But what we need to do is create a form, and we'll implement cross-site scripting protection. Um, and let's see if we installed that. I don't think we installed it, so we need to install it. Check. What else do we need to install? All right. So we need to install CSRF or CSRF, which is a Express module to help for this, and Cookie Parser, which also will help because we'll use cookies to manage that and instead of sessions. So it's pretty easy. And when we create a new model, we want to use a unique identifier. So we'll install CUID as well. So we'll go yarn add csurf cookie parser and CUID. So that's yarn add csurf cookie parser and CUID. Okay. And now we need to go into the server and set up our csurf bits. Okay. So we're going to import cookie parser from cookie parser and import CSRF from csurf. That. And then we're going to add some middleware. So we'll say const CRF protection. We'll CSRF cookie true. And that's just going to tell it to use cookies instead of sessions. And we'll create a parse form middleware. It's just going to tell Express that we're using URL encoded forms. And in order for it to work correctly, we have to say extended true. And then we're going to implement our routes, and we'll create a new controller called import game form from controllers games. We'll say form.js. And then we'll also import star as game actions from controllers dot games slash actions.js, like that. We'll comment that out for now because we won't necessarily need it at the beginning. So the first thing we want to do is handle app.get/game/new, and we want to run it through our middleware to generate this cross-site reference um, code, and then we'll call our game form. And then when we receive a post on games/create, we're going to parse the form, and then we're going to do a validation check with our protection middleware, and then we'll call game actions.create. And I'll leave that commented out too for now because we want to kind of keep working outside in. So that's our server JS, and we're going to create a new controller in games called form.js. And for now, that new controller is just going to render our new template. So for now, it's going to be export default function request.res res render. It'll be games/form, and we're going to give it a title, Mario Wkik add game. And that'll go in our HTML header. And then we're going to give it a blank form. So name, description, do published like that, and ID. Okay. So we've got our controller, and now we need to create a view in games called form. So if we go to our views, games, we'll create a new file called form.ejs, right? And it's an HTML file, so we'll do HTML, and we're going to include head, and then we'll take body and header, and then we'll include nav and H2 or H1 crap. Mario Wkik title. And now our form. So we're going to put it in main in a section. And that section will have a header 2 called add Mario game. Little paragraph, and then we'll do form method equals post action equals games create, old school. Okay, and we're gonna add an input of type hidden, and the name will be underscore CSRF, and the value will be CSRF, right? And that's our hidden input. And then we're going to add some form fields. So for name, bring in name, and then description, and finally we'll do published. And input type text ID. So the ID will match to the label published, and name is what's going to come through for the post. So we want publish there as well. And then value is what's going to be set when we send our document. So say published. When we render our document, which will be blank. But I'm kind of setting this up for an edit, right? And then finally, we want to add our buttons. I'll just copy those to save time. So I type submit the game, and then cancel. We'll just go back to games. So that should cover our template, our view, and that gives us our view and our controller, and we've got it referenced on the server. Only thing I want to make sure is in our index EJS for games, do we have a button to add? No, we don't. So we want to create a new section, and then a button to add game/new. We'll say add game, and the section is a flex box, so we'll say justify content end, and that should push this button. If we wrap it in a bold, I'll make it a button over to the right. Okay, so now let's run yarn dev. Cool. And we'll go to the browser, and cool. So we've got home. We go to games, still listing our games, and we go to add games, and misconfigured CSRF on index 71. So did something wrong there. Hang on. That'll be in our server. CSRF. Import cookie parser. Okay. Know what I did. So we got to say app.use. We just got to tell it to use the cookie parser. So yeah, it's just cookie parser. Okay. Now let's restart. Go home, games, add. Okay. CSRF is not defined. Cool. Okay. So if we go into our controller, you can see we're not putting CSRF in here. So we need to do CSRF colon. And this will come from, I think it's CSRF token, like that. So because of the middleware, it'll come from this middleware right here, and it's going to attach to the request object a function called CSRF token. And that should generate a token. Let's go to home. Let's see. Okay, it didn't get my improved changes. No, now it did. Cool. Okay, so we've got home, go to games, add game, and we've got our form. Cool. Hit submit, and of course we don't have that. Cool. So we've got our games, and now all we have to do is handle our submit. And in order to do that, we need a controller. So we'll create a new controller. Oops. In games called actions. And in that new controller, we're going to import the model. And we're going to import this CUID library, which will generate a random number uh, or a random string so that we can use to name our model. And actually, yeah, I think that's good. And this create function is a controller, and we're going to need to get some some we're going to need to take our body, which is coming in via the request of the form, and extract out some important bits. So we want name, description, published. We'll extract that out of the body. And for right now, we're just going to console log it. And then we're going to render a view called games success. And that view will have a title, Mario Wkik, add game success. And we're not going to call our controller yet. We're just going to work on rendering our view. So we need to create this view called success.ejs. And to save time typing, just going to pull a copy of it. Okay. So, got HTML. Cool. So what we want to do is once we submit the form, we essentially want to render a success page and allow the user to return back to the games list and see their game. So we go home and let's just go back to server really quick and double check and make sure. Okay, so we can uncomment out this import as game actions, and we can uncomment out this post now so we can handle the games create. Everything is good. So we start with home, go to games, go to add games. We'll say Mario Kart racing game. And and it was published 1999. And I'm just making that up. I don't know when it was published. Okay, success. Cool. Return the games. It's not there because we haven't added our model code and our hypercode. So let's do that real quick. And we'll start in our controller. In the actions. And let's go there. And then basically we've got our body. We console logged it. And see, we don't want that. We just want the name, description, and published. So we pulled that out. And now we're going to go to call await and games.add from our model. And then we're going to pass an ID of game dash plus CUID. So that'll generate a unique value for our game. And then we're going to set the type to game, even though that's would be defaulted when we go through validation. And we'll set our name to name and description to description and published to published. Okay. Then we'll say if result is okay, which means it was successfully saved, we'll render success. Else, let's send for right now just to save time. H1 error could not save game. So what you would do is render a success view and, go down here and, or an error view and go down here and make it a really nice error view. But for now, we're just going to do a shortcut. Okay. So now this await games.add is not implemented. So we need to go into our model game. Just make sure that we import it right. Yeah. Game. And we have a list function, but we need an add function. So export a sync function, add, and it's going to bring in a game document, right? And what we want to do is a couple of things. We want to validate the data with our schema. And if that's okay, then we'll call hyper to add it. So we've got our validate function. So the first thing we want to do is do const success data error. And we'll call validate game. Okay. So this safe parse returns an object with success, which is a Boolean, data and error, and both data and error are optional. If success is true, then data will be set. So now I can just return await hyper.data.add game. Actually, data, because we want to add the data from here. And then else return okay false and the error because that will be set. Okay. So now in our controller actions, we're checking to see if it's okay. And if that's false, we'll set an error. If it's true, we'll show success. And then the user can click to see the games list and validate that the game is actually added to the list. Okay. So let's go through it. We'll start with home, games, new game, Mario Kart, racing game in 1999. And we'll hit submit. Okay, success. That's good. And we go and we've got Mario game. Cool. Good deal. So with that, that's kind of part one of this workshop where we have gone from scratch, creating an Express app using EJS as our view engine, and work through connecting Hyper in our model layer and created two model functions, an add and a list. And in part two, we'll do an update remove and do, a full CRUD form. And then in other parts, we may do characters and those things um, to just kind of show it again. And then an association between games and characters. Because, like Donkey Kong, what characters were in Donkey Kong? Mario Brothers, what characters were in there? And we'll associate those two model types so that we can get a list of appearances from characters in a game and a list of games would you view a character. So, so it's kind of probably three, maybe four parts to this workshop, and this is part one. Hope you enjoyed it, and just let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.